Welcome back, everyone, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judith Weigel, your host and amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do, amicable divorces. Our guest today is not only important for all of you, but he's really important for me too, personally. Adam Cole. Adam Cole, how are you, Adam?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me, Judith. How are you?
I'm great. Now, let me tell everybody why it's so very important that you talk to me and everybody else. So, Adam is a tax attorney. We always need tax attorneys at some point in time. A financial advisor, a mediator. So you know how I love mediators. A financial coach and a financial therapist. I got this all from the website and from our talk the other day. So Adam has his own podcast as well. And the podcast is called the Equal Partners Podcast. So we're going to get to that in a second, but I want to talk to you and I want you to share with our audience what you do for couples. You're called the Couples Financial Coach.
Exactly.
What does that mean?
So my work is all about not just getting your finances in order, but also how do you relate to your significant other or your spouse or your co-parent about finances. Finances is one of the top causes of stress, one of the top causes of divorce. And it's not just because people are living paycheck to paycheck and don't have a lot of income. It's actually an extremely complex topic that is taboo, that's challenging enough for one person to navigate, let alone bring a second person into the mix. And we don't even have to talk about if you bring kids and, new spouses and stepkids and blended family. I mean, it can get extremely challenging. So my job and what I do with the background that I have is help couples navigate these conversations, create trust and safety around talking money so that they can move from that place of overwhelm or anxiety or avoiding the topic or fighting, and then do what's needed, both in terms of communication, but also practically speaking, so that they can figure out what are the goals that are most important to us and how are we going to get there. But backing it up with that piece that, okay, now we're working as teammates so that we are on the same side, even if life happens and we make more money, we make less money, we have another kid, etc., right? That we are rowing in the same direction as much as possible. And if we ever get off track, we know how to get back on track.
And your work primarily takes place well before a divorce would happen, really to prevent a divorce from happening, right? Because the number one reason why people get divorced is not adultery, it's money.
Yeah, so that is typically where I come in, is for couples who, they want to stay together, but money is challenging for some reason. Like I said, fighting, or maybe they're avoiding it, or they're just overwhelmed and don't know where to start. But a lot of the conversations and skills are going to relate really well no matter the context, right? In terms of talking about money, whether it's with a current spouse or a former spouse or what have you.
What is your philosophy, Adam, about money, and how is this philosophy expressed in your work with couples? You had some wonderful things you said when we talked the other day. Yeah. And please share with that philosophy.
Great question. First, I would say that money primarily can be used as a tool to help us live the lives that we want to live. Now, the question is, how do we get there? Some people might say, oh, well, let me get some objective financial advice and take the emotion out of it. For me, I don't think that's really plausible, because even a decision on, whether I want to get just Netflix or if I want to, get a whole package from DirecTV, that has an emotional component in as much as each person has different preferences, right? This stuff is very subjective. What you want to do is work through the emotions that get you reactive in a place of anger, resentment, frustration, bitterness, right? Or even fear. Work through those so that you can have the conversation from this kind of healthy, grounded, centered place emotionally, as well as getting clear on your current financial situation so that you're also grounded in that information.
I wonder if your skills and talents as a mediator come into play when you said this to me, and I'm going to quote you because I really loved what you said. You said, I give compassion and empathy around money. I provide compassion and empathy around money. And I guess this goes back to what you just said. There's a lot of fear and anxiety and emotion tied up into making money and spending money.
There absolutely is. And, you know, I have the different experience that you laid out, and I kind of bring it all together to call myself a couples financial coach. So, you know, I don't practice tax law anymore, and I don't work as a financial advisor anymore, but I bring that knowledge and experience to my clients. So it helps me help them navigate a whole bunch of these aspects. And, you know, while not a psychotherapist or a licensed social worker, nevertheless, this conversation is essential to dive into the mindset around it. And a lot of times, because money is such a challenging and taboo topic, many of us have never had any sort of safe space to talk about it, to get vulnerable and talk about our fears and worries, as well as our hopes and dreams. You know, my clients are as likely to hide their they're as likely to suppress their fears and worries as they are to suppress their hopes and dreams. Sometimes they're embarrassed to say those because they think their partner won't support them or they're not going to be able to do it. So the essential foundation of my work is creating a welcoming space where people can start to shed the layers of protective emotional armor, start to talk about these things, reflect individually, but also talk to their partner or the other, in this maybe a co-parent, right? Because that allows you to have a money conversation that is not a fight, but is instead constructive and positive. And you get to learn more about yourself and your counterpart. And that is what really builds the foundation for sorting through the more challenging and particular money conversations that come up in the course of planning a life.
So that all makes sense because you were also saying that you focus on the quality and integrity of the relationship. And I don't think and I'll put myself in the category of everybody else, I don't think we look at it that way. So I know for me, you're right in that we didn't talk about money in my family when I was growing up. Right. And certainly girls really didn't get involved in financial conversations because it was the traditional male model. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean Derek Zoolander as a male model. I do mean the model of the men are going to take care of it. Don't worry, honey. Here's what you have to spend this week, groceries, kids, etc.
Yeah. And, you know, that model, I think a lot of us have recognized is not equitable, not fair, disempowering to women. But what's interesting is the relics remain. And by that, I mean, the fact is, whether you're a millennial or Gen X or baby boom or whatever, you grew up in a society where most of what you saw, whether it was in your own home or in TV shows and around you, had men taking the lead on important financial matters and women taking a back seat. And so part of the work that I end up doing with a lot of my couples is, how do we actually move past that? And it's one thing to say in your kind of conscious brain, as I like to call it, oh yeah, I believe, men and women are equal in a heterosexual relationship, doesn't matter. who stays with the kids, who earns the most money, who manages the money. But in the other parts of your brain, in your subconscious, so to speak, all those narratives that you've picked up over time are deeply embedded. And so in order to create a truly harmonious partnership, it can be of tremendous value to look into, okay, what have I seen, read, heard, experienced, and how did it influence my points of view around money? And then start to unpack that as an individual and with your partner. And in my work, because I focus exclusively on couples, that inquiry and that conversation, I use it to help couples have a money conversation that isn't contentious. Because if you go straight to trying to budget or straight to arguing about should we get the $4,000 couch or the $2,000 couch, I mean, I kind of put the word arguing in there, so I presuppose the outcome. But discussing a $4,000 couch versus a $2,000 couch when you don't feel safe talking about money, you don't trust that your partner will actually listen to and care what you have to say, and you don't understand the bigger picture of where you are financially and where you're trying to go, you're basically just asking for a fight, right? And so having this conversation about your influences around money and your mindset, it actually helps you get the conversation started, but in a way that doesn't usually lead to an argument, because you're just saying, this is my experience, right? And that alone sometimes is enough to transform couples' relationship around money, right? And just kind of knock down the walls.
I think you're absolutely right. From my experience, not only as a mediator and a paralegal who files for what we call amicable divorces, but from talking to interviewing a lot of attorneys, therapists, financial planners, etc. We have conversations about everything but money when we're growing up. Our parents teach us the rules of life, whatever they consider to be the rules of life. But we really don't talk about money.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter what socioeconomic background you come from, does it? Really?
And if we do talk about money, it's usually, when I was growing up, I was lucky to be taught how to balance a checkbook. And my grandfather really pushed me. He was a huge influence that when I would earn $10, I wanted to spend $10 on baseball cards. He said, you're going to put 8 in this account and you're going to spend 2 on baseball cards, right? And so that was valuable, but navigating money with a partner is so much more complicated, or with a co-parent, because we're not going to have the same point of view. We're not carbon copies of each other. No two humans are in terms of mindset. And so how do you navigate your own needs, your own triggers, your own values, your own emotions, right? Because one of the things, for example, in that situation that I took on was, if you waste your money, that's bad and you're bad. So I learned how to save, but in part it became like almost a fear-based thing. And part of my own journey has been to dig into that and recognize it and do the work to take a look when there's an opportunity to spend money, and not have my fear of making a mistake or screwing up grip me, so that I can't look objectively at the situation. And so that instead I can say, okay, I know I got that fear. Now let me actually look at this opportunity, particularly as a small business owner, right? We're having all opportunities all the time to invest in different softwares, coaching courses, advertising, etc. And you have to be able, as a business owner, to gather the information you need, but trust yourself to make that call. And if I had hung on to that mindset of like the fear and panic around spending money until I know it's coming back to me, I would have missed a lot of opportunities to move my business forward, right? On the other hand, if you spend too aggressively, you could lose your kind of cushion there, right? And so it becomes about, how can you cultivate that self-awareness so that you can operate in the middle, in that kind of pocket. And, The bad news is that we often partner with people who have an opposite mindset, right? One person tends to be more of a saver, one more spender. But the good news about that is for the saver, like myself, the spender helps them come out of their shell and learn that it's okay to enjoy life a little bit, right? And for the spender, the saver helps them realize, hey, I'm going to have a lot more freedom and less anxiety and more peace of mind if I take certain steps to make sure I'm also taking care of having, let's say, an emergency fund and investing for retirement, so that I'm not kept up at night either now or in 20 years from now panicking about what am I going to do. I'm going to get kicked out of my house and I'm too old to want to go back to work.
We look at things like emotional issues, anger management issues, anxiety issues, inability to consistently hold down a job. People have these issues. And those of us who work in the field of divorce at a certain point realize that everything stems back from the family you grew up in. And when we're in mediations, we just ask the simple questions. Well, what was it like when you grew up? And when people start talking about what it was like when they grew up, all of a sudden, everybody understands each other. And conversations for settlement become easier. And so this takes in the relationship towards money. I'm dealing with a couple right now where she was rather poor growing up, and I can see it. I can see her relationship to money as we're going through the settlement agreement, fear-based. And there's plenty of money to go around, by the way. In this settlement, there's plenty of money to go around. No one's going to be homeless ever in their lives.
Right. And fear-based, by the way, I've seen it go two directions. Sometimes it's fear-based and I'm going to desperately hang on to the money and claw for every penny. But sometimes it's fear-based, like, I don't know if I can trust that I'm going to have this money tomorrow, so I might as well enjoy it while I have it. Right. It can go either way.
Yeah.
But in either case, it's driven by that fear and the stress of what it's like to grow up in poverty, which has tremendous effects on the psyche.
Without a doubt. And it really, and assigning value to yourself even. Okay, now on your website, I didn't take the quiz, but there's a quiz called Love and Money, which I loved because, we don't really put the two together. Now, without taking the quiz, I'm going to let you say what it is a second, but all of a sudden the idea came to me, well, wait a minute. When should the prenups be written in regards to before we get married and having these discussions about money? It's the first time it really comes up when one potential spouse initiates, right?
Absolutely. So I'll say first, the good news is that if you wish you had a prenup but didn't have one, there's also postnups, which not everybody knows about, but essentially two parties can enter into an agreement, a contractual agreement, at any time, right? There's some rules the law puts in place, okay, but for the most part, that's true. So you can work on this at any time. Now, in my work with clients, I don't make specific recommendations about too many things, including prenups. However, what I've learned, and there's actually an episode on my podcast about this as well, I have a guest who helps people navigate the front end and back end of marriage from a legal and emotional perspective. And she helped me realize that having one of these agreements in place can create a really interesting insurance policy for the marriage. So here's what I mean. I used to live out in California. I have a lot of clients who are in the Bay Area and work in tech. And so one of them might be working for a startup. And maybe right now they're not earning a whole lot of money. But if that thing takes off and gets investors or goes public, they could go from having very little money to having millions and millions of dollars, right? And so if you're that person's spouse, you maybe want some assurance. Hey, if I'm going to stay home with the kids while you work on this startup, if that thing goes public, even if it goes public after we get divorced, I still want a piece of that, right? So how can we make that happen? Maybe in the event of the divorce, I have the option for the cash value of half of your shares that you own, or to receive half the shares, right? Because sometimes with a private company, you can't buy back in, right? Like from the outside.
Right.
So what can we do to assure you that the investments you're making of time, energy, and money into this relationship, or even the money you're forgoing, right? Or the job, I'm going to take the job I don't like because it's going to pay more, and that's going to allow you to stay home with the kids or go back to school or try to build the business you've always dreamed of. Well, okay, what if you up and leave me just a few years later as that business is starting to pick up? Maybe now it's only worth 10,000, but I can tell it's going to be worth $1 million in a few years. That doesn't seem fair, right? Okay, so let's talk about this in advance. And I find that it has the potential to be a valuable way to create peace of mind. However, the first truth is there's a lot of stigma around prenups, right? We see them portrayed as for the rich, for gold diggers, for wealthy people trying to protect themselves from, people who want to take their money. That is not the only scenario where a prenuptial agreement can be valuable. The second thing is, if you don't have that trust and safety talking about money and money related topics, and you go and try to negotiate a prenup, it's liable to create hurt feelings and maybe even resentment or animosity. And that's not good, right? So I always advise, before you take any of these concrete, significant steps, first build that foundation of feeling safe talking to each other about this topic. And then from there, okay, right? If you feel like your partner doesn't understand you and they're going to judge you, and you worry about like trust issues in the relationship, and then you go and say, I want to have a prenuptial agreement, I think anyone listening can imagine the directions that might go. But if you two are listening to each other, understand each other, and you're sharing about your goals and your dreams and the things that concern you, you might then come to the conclusion mutually that a prenuptial agreement or postnuptial agreement could be a way to help you navigate some of those fears and concerns, or to help you solidify some of those hopes and dreams.
See, I think a conversation with you, the financial coach, the couples, wait a minute, the couples financial coach.
That's it.
Okay, the couples financial coach. See, I think this would be a really good time to talk with you before the prenup, just to get our philosophies about money straightened out, just to share what it meant to build the wealth. I mean, wealth is, of course, subjective. To build the wealth we've already built individually, that brought us to this point. And then here's what I do when I mediate for prenups. I don't write prenups. Really and truly, only attorneys should write prenups. The law changing around it, I wouldn't know about because I don't work in that capacity. Therefore, I don't write prenups because I want them to stand up in court. So I won't do that.
Sure.
But when they come in, I say, well, we're going to mediate what you want in the prenup. So it's very clear to them. If somebody has worked since they were a kid, maybe in the entertainment industry, they have royalties coming in on songs, on films, on TV shows, well, maybe they want that to themselves, and they'll explain why. And the other person has their stuff maybe. But then the interesting turn and point in this mediation is, what do you want to build together now? That's the harder question, isn't it? What do you want to build together?
It is. And, I'll say, especially for folks listening, I can't tell you how many times I'm talking to a couple, we're in a consultation, or even sometimes when they're already a client, and I ask them a question like that. What do you want? What do you dream about? What are your goals that involve finances? What are the two of you wanting to build together? And it's like, immediately, instead of answering my question, they tell me all the things that they don't like or don't want. It's much easier for our brain. We have that negativity bias, and it's actually really vulnerable to talk about what you want to build with someone else. By saying what you don't want, that's actually a little bit safer because you're restricting it to that. Oh, I don't want to move to another country. Okay, but what do you want? There's literally an entire universe of options there. And there's this fear baked in that, well, what if what I want, if I really tell my partner what I want and they don't want the same thing, what's going to happen to us? Are we going to be able to stay together? Are we going to be able to successfully co-parent? Is it going to compromise my kids' education if we can't agree on whether they should be in public or private school? And so that's why I appreciate what you do as a mediator to help them explore these conversations in a constructive way, understand the various needs and interests they have. And, sometimes I see people, they try to negotiate per item, like, what do you want to do with the house? What do you want to do with the royalties? What do you want to do with the income? What do you want to do with the debt? An alternative approach is to talk in the sense, bigger picture. How do we want to allocate things? Do we want to allocate it based on who has more income and resources at the time? Do we want to split it all 50-50? And if you come to an agreement on that, then all you have to do is at most hire a financial person who knows how to run spreadsheets, and they can calculate the values of everything now and into the future. And okay, here are some options for 50-50. You take this, you take that, you split this one down the middle, boom, we're 50-50, right? The math is the relatively easy part because we have spreadsheets and calculators that can do that. And it's determinable. We can get an actual answer. If you tell me you want to split 60-40, we can figure out a valuation of your assets that is 60-40. But if you're going to town about each individual thing, now let's say you have 10 sources of income or debt, right? That becomes 10 potential arguments that you have to settle versus figure out one or two up front, get a sense of that big picture, and then the compromises, the way forward, often reveal themselves to you, right? Because you learn how to, like you said, appreciate at a different level how you came to be the way you are, the way and what really matters to you. And it's a beautiful thing in that spot because I just watch it all the time with my clients. All of a sudden, issues that were contentious become no-brainers because they've let that guard down. They're not trying to protect themselves anymore. Like, of course, you should take care of yourself, but they've let down that layer of armor that like protects them from certain level of vulnerability, but also pushes away this person who they're trying to either build a life or even co-parent or raise a family with, right? And inside of that, I mean, the progress you can make is exceptional.
I know. I agree. I agree. It really is quite easy to talk about, do you want kids? Do you not want kids? Do we like where we're living now? Is there a possibility to move? But when it comes to the discussion of money, it's far more sensitive. And I agree with you. It's not clear. Mm-hmm. Most of us don't clearly map out what our financial lives will look like. Mm-hmm. And it's just, yes, it's I love those prenup mediations because it's the first time a couple really thinks about, well, how do we want to grow financially? What do we want to build financially? And it's not an easy question to answer, but it's the perfect timing for that question as well.
It is. I mean, if you haven't already tackled this by the time you are engaged or newlyweds, it starts to become time
or
to
put down the deposit at the hotel for the wedding.
Right. I mean, here's the thing. Even the wedding itself can be
huge.
Thousands, tens of thousands, even more. Right. And in order to figure out what's the right plan of action, it would be in your best interest to have some of these conversations A lot of people just kind of go based on what they think or feel or what their parents tell them. But what I like to do with clients who are not yet married and maybe planning a wedding is, look, a dollar is a dollar, whether you put it towards your wedding, towards your home, towards your fund for your future children, or towards your business. So let's think about this. How much money is going to, do you want to put towards the wedding? What's like the optimal setup? Is it 80,000 towards your wedding, or is it 30,000 towards your wedding? Take the other 50,000 and put it towards the down payment for a house. I can't answer that for you, Judith, or for anybody, right? It's a subjective inquiry. But what I can do is help you learn how to communicate about it and then push you to do the right kinds of research to figure out what things that you might want to have will cost, to understand your current financial situation, and then ask you the right questions and facilitate the dialogue with you and your partner so that you can sort through and kind of jockey a little bit back and forth and then ultimately settle on something that feels good for each of you and for both.
So let's go back to the emotion of money now. And you're with a couple and you realize that one person uses money as a substance to be abused. It's a substance abuse issue. And money is like drugs, like alcohol, like gambling, like pornography, like any food. You can misuse it. And what do you do as the couple's financial coach when you're with a couple and you realize, I think this person may have a substance abuse concept where money is concerned? Then what do you do?
It's a great question. And it's good timing to ask it because I am in the process of writing a blog post where this will be one thing that I briefly address. It's for anyone who's interested, it'll come out on my site soon enough, which is couplesfinancialcoach.com is the new site. It's actually being rebranded, but it's a response to a Dave Ramsey article that's called like Marriage Counselor or Financial Coach, which one do you need? And they propose this kind of situation. A spouse has, let's say, a gambling problem, which could be right one of the ways they're using money to get a rush, right? They're using money to fill maybe some emotional gap. What do you do? Now, I think it's going to be a circumstantial inquiry. If the spouse who has this dysfunctional relationship with money, if they have acknowledged it and they're taking responsibility for it and taking steps to work on that, then we can incorporate that into the work we're doing for them together as a couple, right? And them forgiving themselves and their partner accepting the past and them creating a vision for the future is going to be super important and can be done. The more that person with the dysfunctional relationship with money, the more they're avoiding responsibility, the less they're acknowledging the mistakes they've made and the impact of those mistakes, the less they're doing to work on it, then for me, it becomes, okay, maybe this isn't the right client right now, right? And then I might look for licensed therapists in my network who I trust to navigate these kinds of issues and say, okay, let's get this thing reasonably under control, right? And then we can start moving forward. Because, and you know this as a mediator, it's important to be successful that both parties have relatively equal power, right? And that they are competent, meaning like they are aware, they can listen, they can understand what the other person is saying. If somebody is mired in an addiction and a dysfunctional relationship with money that is really intense, and they're in complete denial such that they can't take responsibility or hear anything otherwise, it's going to be really difficult to help them come to any sort of equitable decisions, any sort of fair decisions around their money, because they're not really communicating as equals, right? So I basically make that sort of subjective inquiry about, is there enough here and enough growth that I can help them get to that place myself? Or is it something that one of the partners needs to work out and make some progress on first, and then we can dive into that joint conversation.
How do you address it though with the money challenged person? How do you address it? Do you say, I don't know, that I'm thinking that maybe your relationship to money is very deep rooted in your past. I'm actually thinking this person, therapist, might be very good for you to speak with so that you can come to a much healthier place. Or would that be too much for you to say?
Well, the reality is that it's a delicate dance to navigate a situation like this. And I see my role for my clients is supporting them in getting to where they want to go. And so whatever needs to be said or asked or done, that's what I'm going to aim to do. Now, if I think that it's best to just say flat out, like they need a kind of reality check, I might do that. But initially, what I want to do is help them explore their own relationship to money. And sometimes that alone, right? They see how they grew up, how it's affected them. There's also some really powerful questions that you can ask yourself, even if you're listening to this, right? If my relationship and my relationship with money vis-a-vis my partner, if we continue down this path for another 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, how's that going to go? Is that going to work for me? Is that going to work for us? What's our financial situation going to look like? What's our emotional, romantic relationship going to look like if we continue down this path? For some of you, you might be like, yeah, it's rock solid. It's going to be probably totally fine. For others, if you get really honest, you say, yeah, it's going to go really poorly, right? And so a lot of times that's enough to jolt somebody to say, whoa, something's got to change, right? But beyond that, like as someone with a background of a coach and a mediator, my job is to really listen, ask questions, but also point out what I'm hearing. For example, I had a client recently who referred to himself as, he likes to spend a lot of money. If he buys something that he likes, he'll go buy 7 more of them for his father, for his sister-in-law, for his friend.
I
right?
love this person already.
Right. And his wife is much more like, we have to be really smart about this. We can't just give things away. We have to get our ducks in a row. And she'd worked on him and he was spending less. But he used the word to describe, he said, yeah, I spend frivolously sometimes. So this is where that experience as a coach, as a mediator kicks in. And, something to say, frivolously. I said, can we go back to something you said? You described that your spending is frivolous. That's an interesting word because usually when people say that, there's some sort of implicit negative judgment. What comes to mind? Like, what do you think about that? He goes, oh, yeah. I feel bad about when I spend frivolously. I said, okay, well, let me tell you something. Frivolously for you is just fine for Kim Kardashian, right? It's no problem for Kim Kardashian. So it's a relative thing. And if you are judging yourself as frivolous, you're basically calling yourself bad, right? And unfortunately, we know that shame can be a helpful motivator in the short term, but in the long run, it can outlive its usefulness and create even more negative dynamics in the relationship or for you personally, right? So what I was able to do in this case is, okay, he had this problematic spending habit, but get him to be keenly aware of it, but also how he views it. And then for both of them now, part of the process is that she can see his formerly known as frivolous spending as, hey, he's super generous and he encourages her to enjoy life and not just out of fear, sock it away and never do anything fun with it, right? On the other hand, even though she has the panic and anxiety and fear about money, so she just tightens her grip tighter and tighter, she can also teach him how to be thoughtful and a little bit more systematic in making these choices around how to spend our money, right? And to have some structure and goals for the future and make sure we're checking up that we're on track for our goals. And so once they can get rid of all that judgment of self and other, there's often something really beautiful that they can glean from each other that can actually help them live a more balanced life. I'm just engaging them on all sides of this inquiry, having them reflect on their own choices, on the impact of their choices, on the likely future if nothing changes, but then also noticing where they're also being inside of a shame or self-judgment or self-criticism, right? The kind that makes you want to avoid conversations altogether. Because we need to break that. We need to break out of the avoidance cycle, right? And that's the only way to move forward.
The one thing out of what you said that I was wanting to share with you is, well, why does this gentleman want to give away? I mean, it sounds wonderful. Yes, he's giving away part of his wife's money, but why? Why is this important to him? Because it's important to him for some reason.
Yeah, and it's a really important inquiry. And at what point in working together my clients might uncover something like that, it varies, because I always start with this inventory of how you grew up with money and the influences and what your mindset is. And sometimes people have that insight and that breakthrough right there. Sometimes it happens later on at a moment they wouldn't even expect. For how I look at it, because my focus is on the couple thriving financially and in their relationship, he can actually get away, potentially. He may not even need to figure out where that came from, as long as his partner understands that this is his personality type, and he can understand her personality type and get that she's not trying to, stop him from enjoying life. And then they can balance each other out, come up with a plan that they like, and live within that. Maybe in the plan they create, they're splitting household expenses, but then of the leftover money, maybe he gets more of it, because this way he can go and spend, and she doesn't have as many material desires. So maybe he gets 80% and she gets 20%, and that keeps them happy. There's no rules here. It doesn't have to be strictly 50-50, equal. That's one approach. But if you take that approach, usually you're taking it out of fear and an unwillingness to have the uncomfortable conversations to really look more qualitatively at your relationship as it relates to money. So sometimes you don't even need to unpack that. But if you can, it can certainly help you clear that up. And like I mentioned before, be able to be a little bit more grounded and objective in making those choices about, do I want to buy 5 more of these for everyone and their mom?
So all that is fine, well and good to keep the couple together and to have them enjoy a wonderful financial future. But I work in the field of divorce. So in divorce, money comes into play 2 different ways. It comes into play dividing the money, dividing the stuff that is financially valuable. It also comes into play with the continuation of the relationship once the divorce is final, and that's the co-parenting relationship. So I've seen 2 things. I've seen people make really bad decisions in their settlement agreements because they're not accurately looking at their own needs going forward. They're not penciling out their budgets properly. And they're so used to spending money if it's a higher net worth couple, and they're just in the habit of living off of X number of dollars, which is absolutely going to change once the divorce is final. Because all the money that 2 people make and combine and put in one household is not going to give you the exact same lifestyle when you have 2 households. Absolutely. If the money doesn't increase, right? How can you help people? Can you come in and help people, if they're open to it, to make a good financial settlement in a divorce?
Yeah, well, taking as an assumption that it's a reasonably amicable divorce, which is, of course, the kinds of things that
We
you
hope
most
for.
focus on, right? And that we
Right.
hope for.
I do. Yes.
Right. It's going to be a very similar process, except when it comes to goals, you may have fewer joint goals. Maybe your only joint goal is around caring for your children, right? Which could have several subparts, but that's fine. So how do we want to navigate? What are our joint goals? What are our most important joint goals, right? Because maybe for one parent, it's saving for college, and for the other one, it's getting them into that private high school, right? And so we can negotiate that, but getting clarity on what our main goals are and how we're going to achieve that as a team and what kinds of commitments we're willing to make to each other, it's absolutely possible. And in the same kind of thing as far as your inventory of your relationship to money and then sharing that with the other person, right? I mean, listen, as somebody who's been married and divorced myself, I know the emotions of that moment and how beyond difficult it can be. But if we can step back and take a breath and say a little bit of courage and effort right now is going to save us an enormous amount of heartache, stress, and fighting down the line. So let's come together and do some of that introspection about our relationship to money. Let's share about it a bit with each other. Learn that we can have a conversation about money that's not contentious and go through some of these similar steps, even if you were, let's say, a newlywed or a couple that wanted to stay together. And then just when it comes to, let's say, looking at each of the things you spend money on and prioritizing which ones are worth keeping and which ones you might want to cut. Okay, well, so maybe you're only talking about that in the context of expenses for your kids. And that's fine. So you only work on those. Whereas the choices I'm making in my personal life, how much I want to go to Burger King or a fancy restaurant or cook at home, that's up to me. But we can still come together and talk about the joint items that matter, right? In terms of what are we prioritizing specifically? What are the overall goals we're prioritizing? And especially these pieces about how are we going to keep track of this? How are we going to make sure that we're being accountable to our plan? How often are we going to check in and how?
Well, wait a minute, Adam. In a divorce, there is no plan for both people. So we have to focus on divorce right now, the divorce settlement. And you have a power dynamic going on where one person earns a lot more money than the other person, and they've got to divide assets and debts. They've got to establish spousal support.
Right.
And we're going to talk about child support in a second and all those decisions. But I have seen it come into play that people's relationship to money definitely is sitting there on the mediation table while they're trying to work out a settlement. And I have watched people light a match to their future because the pain of going through the settlement was tough. The idea that one person, the lower earner, albeit a great salary, but the lower earner in comparison to the giant earner, is trying to make decisions to keep his or her lifestyle intact, the lifestyle that existed when two salaries were combined. It cannot be when you're each living on your own salaries plus spousal support and child support. You may still have to make some decisions budgetarily.
Absolutely.
And it's too hard for them. How do we do that? How do we take a pause in the settlement talk and say, would you be open to going to a financial coach, a financial counselor, just to pencil out these financial decisions you're making, and hopefully they're reasonable, they're realistic, they're achievable.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the context of your relationship with the client, but perhaps you say just that. And, we can recognize, hey, if we keep acting just based on feelings, like gut feelings and emotions, and that's our only input, it's probably going to end in a place that is unproductive, whether we fight about it now or one of us gives in and later we're resentful or whatever that is. But, when you're trying to decide what are we going to do with the settlement and what are we going to do with child support and what are we going to do with the house and right? There is, without that broader context, it's like trying to go to the grocery store when you don't know what you're cooking for dinner. Okay, I need something for dinner. I'm going to go to the grocery store, but I don't know what I'm trying to cook. So which ingredients do you get? It's like you need
example.
Right? You need that broader context, and that broader context comes from slowing down, having an emotional outlet, and hopefully fostering better communication between the two people, right? So, I mean, that could even be with a financial coach. It could be with a therapist. It could be with anyone. But to be able to listen, I'm not saying it's going to be simple or easy. Divorce is not easy. My divorce, it was emotionally brutal for me, and we had no children, and we were both grad students with no real assets, right? And it was still the hardest time of my life. So I'm not pretending there's a silver bullet, or if you're in the middle of a contentious divorce, listening to this episode is going to get you out of it completely. But every positive step you make is a positive step and can have powerful ripple effects down the line. So even if you can't get your former spouse to do this, if you can take a breath, explore your own thoughts around money, your own hopes and dreams and fears and worries. If you can get really clear on what it's going to cost for you to continue your lifestyle, or what if you get half, let's say, if you get your piece, what lifestyle that would allow for you, right? And does that work or not? To get really clear on how much money do I make right now? How much money do I spend? What assets do I have? Anything of value? What debts do I owe or might end up with in the settlement? You can do that even on your own. And then when you come to the conversation, you actually have a place to stand, right? It's like, imagine you're in a salary negotiation at a job. A lot of people just go in there and their objective is some sort of fuzzy, like, I guess I want to get as much as I can without pissing off my future boss. That's their kind of orientation. Versus if you're really clear on what you're trying to achieve financially, and you understand that getting to X amount is going to help you be able to buy that home within a year so that you can start your family, right? Then you can actually have that in mind when you're talking to your boss. Okay, I'm trying to get to 100,000. If he's offering me 90, I better go 110 and hope we meet in the middle, right? If I start with 100 and we get stuck at 95, darn it, I just missed the chance. And again, none of this is foolproof, but each bit of exploration, whether it's internally or in terms of your externals, the actual money you have or don't have, how much your lifestyle costs, that's going to help you. You won't get as triggered when you're sitting across from your partner at the negotiation table. You'll be able to have clarity on what is the baseline that you're looking for. And if you are able to get that or more, then, you might be able to kind of take your foot off the gas, right? And especially if you're co-parents, maintaining that amicable relationship.
Well, that's what I want to talk. That's what I want to finish with. We have a couple minutes left only, but that's what I wanted to finish with, because the piece of the divorce that keeps on giving, if there isn't a scheduled payment from the house, so to speak, for somebody's community property share, you are still in a financial relationship when you're co-parenting. And if you have very small children, you have a very long co-parenting relationship.
Oh, yeah.
So let's just say we have two people that have dramatically different relationships to money and spending, but now you have to work mutually for your children, making financial decisions, school, summer camp, when do we buy them the cell phone, upgrading the computer. I mean, it's a myriad of things, right?
Yep.
So for those people that have to exist in a co-parenting relationship, what you offer as the couple's financial coach, can that be templated onto a co-parenting financial relationship?
Absolutely. And here's why. The approach that I take, right, is number one, we're creating that safety around having these types of conversations so we can let our guard down and have them, and it's less exhausting and we don't want to run away, right? But then two, we're trying to figure out what are our goals and priorities. And a lot of times couples come to me and they think we're just not on the same page. We have different goals. And I like to roll it back and say, okay, well, I promise you, you don't have completely different goals. You know how I know? Do you want to live your best life? Yes. Okay, partner two, do you want to live your best life? Of course. Okay, great. So you both want to live your best lives. So you have that in common, right? If it's a co-parenting thing, do you want your kids to live their best lives? Yes, of course. Do you want your kids to live their best lives? Of course I do. Okay, great. We agree on that. Now, at some point, as we move from the general to the specific, there might be points where we diverge, and that's normal and natural. But at least let's get that bigger picture, recognize that we're on the same team, right? And again, this is part of when you let your guard down, you can realize this person is not, even if there's tension from the divorce, they're not trying to make your kids' lives worse, right? At least I hope not. They're not, as long as they're not being like spiteful or vengeful, you're trying to help your kids live their best lives and have the most happiness and success that they can. So if we bring that point of view to the conversation, we can actually start to see ourselves as teammates, right? Instead of you versus me, it's the two of us taking on the challenges, the goals that most matter. And from that vantage point, it just totally transforms the conversation.
You have been listening to Adam Cole, the couple's financial coach, the financial therapist, mediator, financial advisor, tax attorney, and I highly recommend, now you're in Florida, right? I know we're with Zoom, we work everywhere now.
Of course.
Okay, but you're in Florida. So I also would like you to listen to his podcast, the Equal Partners Podcast, because I listened to a few episodes and I thought it was really good. Adam, can you please tell the audience how they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So thank you for the shout out of the podcast. It has been called the Equal Partners Podcast. And for the newest season, it's going to be rebranded as the Couples Financial Coach Podcast. Either one should help you find it. But
you know what? I actually love that new name because it says what it is. It very specifically says, so very good. Keep going.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And that's, I've done a bit of a rebrand everywhere. So on Instagram, on Facebook, I'm Couples Financial Coach, the Couples Financial Coach Podcast. That quiz you mentioned, the Love and Money quiz, the idea there is take you a couple minutes. I'll tell you your type, as in what kind of situation you and your partner are in, anywhere from rock stars at dealing with money inside of your relationship to in the kind of emergency state. Give you some tips and tools, and actually a free tool that is specific to the situation you're in. And you can find that at couplesfinancialcoach.com/quiz. And couplesfinancialcoach.com is my website. A lot of people like to hang with me on LinkedIn, and my last name. So Adam, ADAM, of course, and Cole is KOL. So feel free to
yes, and I wanted to say that because you can just Google Adam Cole and you'll find everything out. But Cole is spelled KOL. And as this podcast is launching, as your episode is launching, your name will be there. So people will be able to get in touch with you. Adam, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time you spent with us and the valuable information you gave us.
Thank you for having me, Judith. I appreciate it.
And I thank all of you for listening. You know I do that each and every day. Please, if you want to suggest any topics for the podcast, you can reach me at Judy, Judy, at constructiveuncoupling.com, Judy at constructiveuncoupling.com, or you can go to my divorce website, divorceresourceinc.com, divorceresourceinc.com, and you can reach me through that. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate the time you've taken to be with us, and I will speak to you next week.